The night before her wedding, Savannah was wrapped in a hush that felt almost sacred. The air outside Amelia Whitmore's old family home carried the faint scent of magnolia and sea salt drifting from the river. Through the tall windows, a soft amber glow spilled from the lamps her grandmother once polished by hand. The oak trees beyond the porch swayed gently, their moss-draped branches whispering against the wooden rails. Inside, the house looked as if time had paused to watch her. The lace curtains trembled with every breeze, and the clock in the hallway ticked with the rhythm of an old heartbeat. On the kitchen counter sat a small glass jar filled with dried lavender, a habit Amelia had kept from Nora Whitmore, her grandmother. Nora used to say that lavender guarded the home from sorrow. Tonight, Amelia hoped it was true. She had spent the day finishing details for tomorrow, checking the seating chart, pressing her simple ivory dress, setting aside her shoes by the bed. Everything was ready, yet her mind refused to rest. She sat on the edge of her grandmother's quilt, staring at the dress hanging from the closet door. It looked weightless, as if waiting for someone else. The silence felt heavier with every passing minute. Amelia thought of Nora, how she used to hum while stitching fabric, how her hands smelled of soap and peppermint oil, how she'd remind her granddaughter to read before you sign anything, even love. That phrase had always sounded quaint, the sort of thing older women said out of habit. Now, hours before marrying Andrew Collins, Amelia found herself replaying it again and again. The wind brushed through the trees, and the porch boards creaked softly as if footsteps moved outside. She looked toward the window, half expecting to see someone there. Nothing. Only the reflection of her own face, pale, uncertain, eyes tired from too much planning and too little sleep. She turned off the lamp, slid under the quilt, and tried to force her thoughts into silence. But sleep, when it came, did not bring peace. In the dream, the air was bright and cool, smelling of lavender and morning dew. She was standing in her grandmother's parlor, though the light was strange, like sunlight seen through water. Nora sat in the rocking chair near the window, wearing the same pale blue dress she had been buried in. She looked calm, alive almost, and her eyes held the steady kindness that used to soothe every childhood fear. "Grandma," Amelia whispered, but her voice felt small. Nora smiled gently and reached out, touching her granddaughter's hair. "Tomorrow morning go to Helen's house," she said softly. "You'll see for yourself." The words lingered in the air, clear and certain, before the room dissolved into light. Amelia woke with a start. The lamp was still off, but the room glowed faintly from the moon. Her heart pounded hard enough that she pressed a hand against her chest. For a moment, she couldn't tell where she was, dream or waking life. The sound of the ticking clock slowly anchored her back to the present. Midnight had passed. She sat up, breathing in the quiet. The lavender jar on the table caught a stripe of moonlight, and for an instant, she thought she saw it shimmer. She told herself it was only nerves, the kind that came before any wedding. Still, the feeling didn't leave. It stayed behind her ribs, a quiet pulse of warning. Amelia pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders and listened to the wind move through the trees outside. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed through the night. She closed her eyes, but the words from the dream would not fade. "Tomorrow morning go to Helen's house. You'll see for yourself." Sleep never returned, only the faint scent of lavender, and the certainty that her grandmother's voice had not come from memory, but from something else entirely. The next morning broke cool and pale over Savannah, the sky still rinsed in shades of silver. At 6 o'clock sharp, Amelia Whitmore turned onto Pinehurst Lane, her old sedan humming softly through the quiet neighborhood. The Collins estate stood at the end of the street, neat, symmetrical, and silent, like everything Helen Collins touched. The white shutters gleamed, the flower beds were pruned to perfection, and the flag at the porch fluttered faintly in the morning breeze. Amelia parked across the road beneath a moss-covered oak. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel. The dream still echoed in her head. Her grandmother's calm voice. The gentle warning. She told herself this was silly, that she wasn't a child chasing ghosts. Still, something deeper than reason kept her there. After a moment, she stepped out, pretending to adjust the strap of her handbag as she lingered by the sidewalk. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and gardenias. Across the yard, the front door opened. Helen Collins appeared, perfectly dressed in a pale beige suit, her posture upright, her hair unmoving in the breeze. She was followed by a woman Amelia didn't recognize, perhaps in her 40s, wearing a navy dress and carrying a leather portfolio. The two paused on the porch steps, speaking in the low, deliberate rhythm of people used to giving orders. Helen's tone carried easily across the still air. "Everything's arranged for this morning?" she asked. The other woman nodded, flipping through her folder. "Yes, we'll have her sign the power of attorney at Green's office before 10. It'll make everything smoother once they're married." Helen adjusted her pearl necklace, satisfied. Good. The less she has to think about, the better. Girls like her, sweet, trusting, they don't need to worry about details. The assistant smiled, faintly, a professional kind of smile. She won't even read it. Girls like her never do. The words struck like a pin to glass. Amelia's breath caught. Her pulse thudded in her ears. For a second, the two women blurred behind the early sunlight. She wanted to believe she'd misheard, that this wasn't what it sounded like. But the tone, light, efficient, almost rehearsed, left no doubt. Helen continued matter of fact. "Once that's signed, we'll drop by my realtor friend. It's best to update the title before the honeymoon. No dilas, no confusión." "Of course," the woman agreed. "I'll make sure it's done quietly." Amelia froze where she stood, half hidden by the oak's shadow. The wind lifted the hem of her blouse, but she didn't move. Each word from across the street fell heavier than the one before. Legal, clinical, final. Power of attorney. Realtor. Title transfer. The pieces locked together in her mind with sickening clarity. She felt her grandmother's presence again, like a hand laid gently on her shoulder. Not imagination this time, but memory guiding her. The dream hadn't been a warning from fear. It had been a message. When Helen and her companion descended the steps, the gravel crunched under their heels. They walked to a sleek black sedan parked by the gate. Helen's voice drifted back once more, sharp and certain. "By the time she's a Collins, everything will already be in order." Amelia turned away quickly, pretending to check her phone as they drove off. Only when the car disappeared around the corner did she allow herself to breathe. Her hands were trembling, though the morning was cool. She walked slowly back to her own car, every step deliberate, careful. There was no anger yet, only the cold, stunned quiet that comes when a truth finally settles. She sat behind the wheel and stared through the windshield at the neat, white house across the street. Then she whispered almost to herself, "You were right, Grandma." The lavender sachet hanging from her rearview mirror swayed gently as she started the engine. This time she didn't drive home. She turned toward the city instead, toward someone who could tell her exactly what that paper meant and how to stop it. By late morning, Savannah's narrow streets were already stirring with life. Sunlight spilled across the cobblestones and over the wrought iron balconies, turning the city into a watercolor of gold and shadow. Amelia parked near a brick building downtown, its sign painted in discreet white letters. Louise Carter, attorney at law. Inside, the office smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Steady, calm, dependable. Behind the reception desk sat a young assistant who barely looked up from her screen. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "No," Amelia replied softly. "It's urgent." The assistant studied her for a moment, then disappeared through a side door. A minute later, a woman's voice called from inside, "Send her in." Louise Carter was not what Amelia expected. She was in her mid-40s, with silver streaks in her dark hair and reading glasses perched low on her nose. Her office was small but immaculate. Law books lined one wall. A large framed certificate from Emory Law hanging above a neat oak desk. The air felt grounded, deliberate. Amelia sat down, her hands clasped together so tightly they trembled. I think my fiancé and his mother are trying to make me sign something I shouldn't," she began, voice shaky. "A power of attorney. They said it's for the marriage. To make things easier." Louise didn't interrupt. She listened the way few people truly listen, without rushing, without surprise, only quiet focus. "Tell me exactly what you heard," she said. Amelia repeated the conversation from that morning. The neat yard, the woman with the folder, Helen's calm confidence. The lawyer took a few notes, tapping her pen lightly on the pad. When Amelia finished, Louise leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. "Do you own property?" she asked. "Yes," Amelia said. "A small house. It was my grandmother's. She left it to me when she passed." Louise nodded slowly. "And is it fully in your name?" "It is." "Good." The lawyer opened a folder on her desk, revealing a stack of pre-filled forms. "Then the first thing we do is file an owner presence restriction with the Chatham County Recorder's Office. It's a statement saying no real estate transactions involving your property can occur without you physically being present to sign. Even if you give someone power of attorney later, this restriction will block them. It's one of the strongest protections we have under Georgia law." Amelia blinked, startled by the simplicity of it. "So, they wouldn't be able to sell or transfer anything?" "Not a thing," Louise said firmly, "without you there in person. Every attempt stops dead in its tracks." The lawyer reached for another document. "Next, I want you to sign a permanent refusal of property-related powers of attorney. It's not legally required, but it makes your stance clear. We'll notarize it right here." She slid the paper across the desk, the kind of form written in language only lawyers could love. Amelia read the first lines carefully. "I, Amelia Whitmore, hereby refuse to grant any third-party authorization over the sale, transfer, or management of my property." The words steadied her. For the first time that morning, her hand stopped shaking. Louise smiled faintly, noticing. "Your grandmother must have been a wise woman, even in your dreams," she said. Amelia looked up, startled. "You believe me?" "I've seen stranger things," Louise replied. "Sometimes the people who raised us don't stop looking out for us just because they're gone." They drove together to the recorder's office, a few blocks away. The clerk behind the counter filed the restriction immediately, stamping the form with a heavy red seal. The sound of the stamp echoed in Amelia's chest like a heartbeat. Back at the office, Louise notarized the refusal document, her tone calm but firm. "Keep this safe," she said. "If they bring anything else for you to sign, call me first. And remember, trust and signatures are not the same thing." Amelia nodded, folding the papers carefully into her bag. As she stepped outside, sunlight hit the red seal through the envelope's window, turning it a vivid scarlet. It felt like proof that she was no longer the girl they thought she was, but a woman who finally knew how to guard what was hers. By late afternoon, the sunlight had softened into that honeyed shade unique to Savannah, the kind that lingered on porches and drifted through lace curtains like a blessing that refused to fade. The Whitmore house stood quiet at the end of the lane, the air warm, the cicadas beginning their steady hum. Amelia set her bag on the table. The papers Louise Carter had given her still tucked neatly inside. For a long while she didn't move. The quiet of the house wrapped around her, the familiar scent of lavender and wood polish grounding her after a day that had felt more like a test than a morning. She reached for the kettle and filled it, the the whistle echoing faintly as the water began to heat. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Andrew. Mom wants us to stop by the notary this evening. Just a few signatures before tomorrow. The words stared back at her, small and cold on the screen. She reread them twice, not because she didn't understand, but because she needed the weight of them to settle. Just a few signatures. The same phrase she'd heard Helen use through the open air that morning. Her chest tightened, but she felt no panic this time. She poured the hot water over the tea leaves and watched the steam rise. Everything felt deliberate now. The sound of the spoon against porcelain, the rhythm of her breathing. The anxiety that had chased her all day had transformed into a strange, steady calm. She glanced toward the open closet. The wedding dress hung from its wooden hanger, ivory and soft, glowing faintly in the slanted light. For a moment, she simply looked at it, the fabric, the delicate lace around the neckline, the way it had seemed to symbolize everything she'd once imagined about love and safety. Then, without ceremony, she lifted it from the hook. Her movements were slow, almost ceremonial. She folded the dress carefully, smoothing the creases with her palm before sliding it into its protective garment bag. The zipper's whisper filled the silence. She laid the bag flat inside the wardrobe, closing the door with a quiet click. The sound felt final. When she turned back to the room, her eyes landed on the framed photograph sitting on the dresser. Nora Whitmore, her grandmother, smiling in front of the same porch that now bathed in afternoon light. The photo was slightly faded, the edges curling with time, but the warmth in Nora's eyes still glowed. Amelia carried the frame to the kitchen and placed it beside her cup of tea. The scent of mint and honey rose into the air. She traced her thumb along the edge of the frame, speaking softly as if the air itself could listen. "You were right again, Grandma." The words came without bitterness, only quiet recognition. Somewhere in her chest, she felt the smallest ache, not of fear, but of clarity. Outside, a car passed slowly down the lane, the hum fading into the distance. The world went still again. She sipped her tea, feeling the heat spread through her palms, then glanced toward the documents Louise had given her. The red seal gleamed faintly through the envelope. A part of her still wished she could pretend not to know, to let the evening unfold as if it were truly just about a notary visit, a few harmless signatures before the big day. But she couldn't unknow what she knew. The veil had lifted. As the sunlight dipped lower, Amelia stood by the window, watching the last golden beams stretch across the porch steps. In the reflection of the glass, she saw both herself and her grandmother's photo side by side, two women bound by a quiet kind of strength. The kettle clicked again, cooling. The day was ending. Tomorrow would bring its confrontation. For now, there was only stillness and the knowledge that she was ready. By the time evening fell, Savannah's downtown was bathed in amber light. The air had cooled, carrying the faint scent of rain on brick. Amelia stood outside the old two-story office building with the brass plaque that read Raymond Green, Notary Public. The windows glowed with the soft yellow of desk lamps inside. She could see her reflection in the glass door, composed, calm. But her pulse thrummed beneath the surface. A dark sedan pulled up beside the curb. Andrew stepped out first, adjusting the collar of his shirt. He smiled when he saw her a little too carefully. "Hey, you look beautiful," he said, reaching for her hand. "It won't take long, I promise. Mom just wants everything squared away before tomorrow." Helen Collins emerged next, elegant as ever in a light gray suit. Her smile was polite, her tone brisk. "Amelia, darling, thank you for coming. This will only take a few minutes. I know how stressful wedding preparations can be." Amelia nodded once. "Let's get it done, then." They entered the notary office together. The scent of paper and ink filled the air. A tall man in his 60s looked up from behind a polished oak desk. "Mr. Raymond Green wore glasses low on his nose and a navy tie with tiny gold dots. His movements were deliberate, his voice low and steady, the kind of man who had seen every kind of client and no longer surprised easily. "Good evening," he greeted. "Please, have a seat." Helen stepped forward smoothly. "We're here to notarize a simple document. Power of attorney. Just routine paperwork before the wedding." "Mr." Green nodded and retrieved the file from his desk. "Very well." He looked at Amelia. "You're Ms. Whitmore?" "Yes." He placed the document in front of him, adjusted his glasses, and began reading aloud as was his habit. His voice filled the quiet office. "Power of attorney granting full rights to sell, transfer, lease, or otherwise dispose of the property located at," he glanced at Amelia, "your residence on Fairview Lane." Amelia's heart gave a slow, deliberate beat. She kept her face calm. "Yes," she said softly. Mr. Green continued, "including authority to sign deeds, apply for registration, and conduct all related transactions on behalf of the owner." The pen in her hand felt heavier than it should have. Across from her, Helen and Andrew watched with expectant calm. Helen's smile didn't falter. Andrew's fingers drummed once against his knee, then stopped. Amelia lifted her eyes to the notary. "Mr. Green, could you please check something for me?" He paused. "Of course. I filed a restriction today with the recorder's office, an owner presence clause. Could you verify whether it's been processed?" Helen's expression flickered for the first time. "Oh, that's not necessary, dear," she said quickly. "This is just routine." But Mr. Green was already typing into his computer. The keys clicked in the heavy silence. He read the screen for a moment, then looked up, his brow lifted slightly, a faint tone of respect entering his voice. "Yes, Ms. Whitmore. The record shows a restriction filed this morning. No property action can occur without your physical presence." The room went still. The hum of the desk lamp was suddenly loud enough to hear. Helen's fingers tightened around her purse strap. Andrew's shoulders slumped. Amelia didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Then there's no reason to sign anything," she said evenly. Helen tried to recover her composure. "Amelia, this isn't what you think. In a family, we trust each other. We share responsibility." Amelia met her gaze, calm and unflinching. "Trust in a family isn't about signatures. It's about honesty." For a moment, the older woman's mouth opened, then closed again. Andrew looked from one to the other, caught between shame and disbelief. "Mom said it was just a formality," he murmured, almost to himself. Amelia set the pen down on the desk. "Formality or not, I won't sign away my home. Not today, not ever." Mr. Green inclined his head respectfully. "Then I'll record your refusal, Ms. Whitmore." He typed a few lines, printed a short document, and stamped it with his seal, a sharp, satisfying thud that broke the silence. The inked circle of red spread across the page, crisp and final. Helen rose abruptly. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice tight but controlled. "A marriage can't survive without trust." Amelia stood as well, folding her hands in front of her. "Then it shouldn't begin with deceit." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The fluorescent light reflected off the polished table, dividing the room in two. On one side, quiet resolve. On the other, wounded pride. Andrew exhaled slowly, his voice low. "I never meant to hurt you," he said. "I just thought this would make things simpler." She shook her head. Simplicity shouldn't come at the cost of respect. "Mr." Green cleared his throat gently. "Is there anything else I can assist with this evening?" "No," Amelia replied, her voice steady. "You've done more than enough." She gathered her bag, thanked him, and turned toward the door. The night air outside was cool and full of crickets. Behind her, the sound of Helen's heels struck sharply against the tile, controlled, angry, but fading with distance. Amelia didn't look back. Under the glow of the streetlight, she unfolded the notary's stamped refusal. The red seal gleamed in the dark like a small flame. It wasn't just ink on paper. It was her boundary made visible the moment she stopped being someone's convenience and became her own protection. The wedding, she knew, would not happen tomorrow. But for the first time in days, she felt entirely free. The night settled heavy over Savannah, soft and warm, the kind of southern stillness that made even time hesitate. The Whitmore house glowed faintly from a single candle flickering in the kitchen window. Inside, Amelia sat at the table, her hands folded around a cup of tea gone cold. The events of the evening replayed in her mind, not like a storm, but like waves receding after the tide, leaving clarity behind. The documents lay before her. Side by side, the owner presence restriction and the refusal of power of attorney, their red seals catching the candlelight. She had placed them carefully on the table as if they were sacred things. Every few moments, her eyes drifted toward them again, needing to see the proof of her own strength. Her phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the quiet. Messages blinked across the screen. "Are you okay?" From Rachel Porter. "We heard something happened at the notary. What's going on?" From a cousin she barely spoke to. Then one from Andrew. "Please, can we talk?" "I didn't mean for it to go this way. I am sorry. Mom was just trying to help." Amelia didn't reply, not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to say that would make the truth smaller or gentler. She turned the phone face down and listened to the silence return. On the sideboard by the window sat the framed photo of Nora Whitmore, her grandmother. The candle's glow danced across the glass, lighting her features, the soft smile, the proud tilt of her chin. Amelia reached for the photo and brought it closer, setting it beside the documents. The air smelled faintly of beeswax and lavender from the sachet she'd hung earlier. It was the same scent that used to fill Nora's sewing room, the same scent that had clung to her clothes when she'd hugged her granddaughter goodnight. Amelia leaned back, letting her shoulders drop, her breathing even out. She felt no anger toward Andrew. Not anymore. He had been weak, not cruel, tied to a mother who mistook control for care. There was no satisfaction in proving anyone wrong. Only a quiet, undeniable peace in knowing she had listened to the right voice. Her grandmother's voice. She lifted the first document, tracing the embossed seal with her fingertip. The texture was rough, almost gritty. It made the paper feel alive, solid. In another life, she thought, she might have signed without reading, just as they'd expected her to. But not now. Not after that dream. Not after everything. The candle flickered as a breeze slipped through the half-open window. Its flame bent low, then steadied itself again. Shadows danced across the walls, soft and rhythmic, like breathing. Amelia whispered, almost to herself, "You were right, Grandma. You always are." Her voice didn't tremble. It sounded grounded, older somehow. Outside, a few raindrops began to fall, tapping gently against the window pane. The sound was slow and deliberate, matching the pulse in her wrist. She watched the wax pool at the base of the candle, its light steady, unwavering. The phone buzzed again, but she ignored it this time. Instead, she reached for the folder Louise Carter had given her and slipped the documents back inside. She tied the ribbon around it, neat and careful, and placed it in the drawer of her grandmother's writing desk. Then she blew out the candle. For a moment, the room was plunged into darkness. But even without the light, the sense of peace remained, anchored deep inside her chest. She stood, looked once more at her grandmother's picture, and smiled faintly. The world outside was still whispering, gossip traveling through family and friends like wind through the trees. But in this small house, everything was calm. The only light now came from the moon filtering through the curtains, glinting off the photo frame, a quiet halo around the woman who had taught her that wisdom, once planted, never dies. The afternoon light in Savannah came soft and slow, as if the city itself was reluctant to move on. 3 days had passed since the night at the notary's office, and in that time Amelia had learned how quickly news could travel. Neighbors had offered sympathetic smiles. Friends sent messages filled with concern. Yet she found herself craving neither pity nor company. The quiet suited her. It felt like truth. She was sitting on the porch that afternoon, a cup of mint tea steaming in her hands, when she heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. The rhythm of it pulled her back from her thoughts. A silver sedan stopped at the edge of the drive. She didn't need to stand to know who it was. Andrew Collins stepped out, looking smaller somehow. His usual confidence, the polished posture, the practiced ease was gone. He hesitated before walking up the path, as though unsure he was welcome. Amelia didn't move to greet him. She simply waited, her face calm, her expression unreadable. "Hey," he said finally, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. His voice was quiet, careful. "Can we talk?" Amelia nodded once, not unkindly. "Come on up." He climbed the steps, pausing to glance around the porch. The air smelled of mint and rain. 2 cups sat on the table. She'd made tea for herself, but somehow had brewed enough for 2. He noticed it, smiled faintly, almost gratefully, and sat across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The cicadas filled the silence. "I wanted to apologize," Andrew began, his eyes fixed on his hands. I know that doesn't mean much after everything, but I need to say it anyway." Amelia listened quietly, her gaze steady. He continued, voice uneven. "Mom said it was normal. She told me every couple does things like that before a wedding. Signing property paperwork, setting up accounts, merging assets. I didn't think about what it meant for you. I just followed along." He let out a shaky laugh, one without humor. "I didn't even read half of it myself." Amelia rested her hands on the cup, feeling the warmth seep into her skin. "You thought it was normal," she said slowly, "to make decisions for both of us without asking." Andrew flinched but nodded. "I thought it would make things easier. I didn't realize how wrong it was until I saw your face that night." She looked down at her tea, the steam curling gently between them. "Together doesn't mean without asking," she said finally. The words weren't sharp, just simple truth. Andrew swallowed, his throat tight. "I know. I see that now." The wind stirred the leaves, scattering the scent of mint across the porch. Amelia poured him a cup of tea, the gesture small but kind. He accepted it with both hands, as if holding something fragile. They sat in silence for a while, sipping slowly, letting the warmth do what words could not. There was no anger between them anymore, only a quiet understanding of what had been lost, and what could not be reclaimed. When Andrew set his cup down, his eyes were wet but clear. "You deserve better than what I was," he said softly. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope someday you can look back and not hate me for it." Amelia met his gaze. "I don't hate you, Andrew. I just see you now for who you are and for what you chose not to see." He nodded, standing slowly. The porch creaked under his shoes. "Thank you," he said, "for listening." She gave a small smile. For once, that's all either of us needed to do. He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, but didn't. Instead, he walked down the steps, pausing at the gate to glance back once. She was still sitting there, framed by the fading light, one hand wrapped around her teacup. When the sound of his car faded down the street, Amelia looked at the 2 cups resting side by side on the table. One half empty, the other still warm. They were like 2 paths that had met for a time, shared warmth, and then drifted apart again, different but still whole. She lifted her cup and took another sip, the taste of mint grounding her in the present. The air was calm, the house quiet. Forgiveness, she realized, didn't always mean return. Sometimes it simply meant release. The week drifted by with a kind of gentle finality, as if the city itself had decided to exhale. By Saturday evening, the sky outside Amelia's window was streaked with soft lilac, the kind of color that seemed to exist only in Savannah at dusk. The air was cool, still carrying the scent of rain and garden mint. Inside the Whitmore living room, a single lamp glowed beside the couch, throwing warm light across the old hardwood floors. Amelia sat curled up beneath a light blanket, a book open on her lap that she hadn't turned a page in for the past 10 minutes. Her mind kept wandering, back to the notary's office, to Andrew's visit, to the quiet that had followed both. It wasn't loneliness she felt now, but a different kind of stillness, one that came after the truth had finally settled into place. The phone rang once, then twice. She reached for it, expecting Rachel or one of her cousins checking in again. But when she saw the name on the screen, she hesitated. Helen Collins. For a long second, she simply watched the screen light up her hand. Then, with a small breath, she answered, "Hello." The voice on the other end was quieter than she remembered, no longer commanding. No trace of the cool control Helen usually carried. "Amelia," she said, the syllables heavy with hesitation. "I hope I'm not calling too late." "No, it's fine," Amelia replied softly. There was a pause, filled with the faint sound of air through the receiver. Then Helen spoke again. "I wanted to apologize," she said. "Not for the wedding, or for Andrew. For me. For thinking I knew what was best for everyone." Amelia didn't speak. She let the silence stretch, giving the older woman room to breathe. Helen continued, her voice unsteady. "I thought control was the same as care. I've done that my whole life, with Andrew, with his father, with everyone. I didn't realize until now how much damage that causes." Another pause. "You showed me that." The sincerity in her tone surprised Amelia. She shifted slightly, her voice calm. "Sometimes we think love means protecting people from every mistake. But it's not love if it takes away their choice." A soft, almost embarrassed laugh came through the line. "I'll learn to stay quiet when no one asks," Helen said, her voice trembling with humility. "It's harder than it sounds." Amelia smiled faintly, her tone gentle. "It's a good start." They spoke for a few minutes longer, not about the wedding, not about Andrew, but about small things, about the heat returning to Savannah next week, about the azaleas that had started to bloom early that year. The conversation wasn't warm exactly, but it wasn't cold either. It was human, honest. When they finally said goodbye, Helen's voice carried a kind of peace Amelia hadn't heard before. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too," Amelia answered. After the call ended, the house was quiet again, filled only with the soft hum of the ceiling fan. Amelia placed the phone beside her and leaned back against the couch. She felt no triumph, no bitterness, only the quiet understanding that not every battle ends with someone losing. Some end with someone finally listening. She turned off the lamp, leaving the room in the dim light of the moon. Outside, the crickets had begun to sing again, their rhythm steady, unbroken, for the first time in a long while. Amelia felt the world settle into balance, not through confrontation, but through grace. Morning sunlight spilled gently through the sheer white curtains, brushing across the wooden floors of the Whitmore house. The air was filled with the faint scent of jasmine from the garden and the comforting aroma of coffee brewing in the kitchen. It had been 3 weeks since the day everything changed, and the house, once heavy with uncertainty, now breathed differently. It felt lived in, lighter somehow, as though it, too, had exhaled. Amelia stood by the window, her hands wrapped around a warm mug. Outside, the world was already awake. The neighborhood children laughed as they waited for the school bus. The sound of a distant church bell echoed across the morning air. Her easel sat by the open window, a half-finished watercolor catching the light, a quiet landscape of the Savannah marshes, soft green against pale blue. She had started painting again, rediscovering the stillness that used to come so naturally. On the small porch table sat a clay pot where young myrtle plant had begun to grow, its leaves tender and bright. Amelia had planted it the week after her conversation with Helen. The same day, she returned to her classroom. Her students had greeted her with handmade cards, their handwriting crooked and full of color. "Miss Whitmore, we missed you," one had written in purple marker. She'd laughed for the first time in days then, realizing that life, in its ordinary rhythm, had quietly welcomed her back. She took another sip of coffee, the warmth anchoring her. The radio murmured softly in the background. Classical piano, slow and thoughtful. On the sideboard by the window, the framed photograph of Nora Whitmore still stood, the same gentle smile frozen in time. Next to it, the envelope containing the 2 notarized documents lay tucked neatly under a book of family recipes, its edges worn from being opened and refolded. Amelia reached for the frame, holding it in both hands. The morning light caught the glass, reflecting the shimmer of her own eyes. She smiled faintly. "Your signature is worth more than anyone's promise," she whispered. The phrase, half memory and half truth, lingered in the air like a blessing. It wasn't defiance anymore, it was wisdom, the kind that didn't need to be spoken loudly to be understood. Her phone buzzed once on the counter, a message from Rachel reminding her about their Saturday market trip. She smiled again, typed back, "I'll bring the mint tea," and set it aside. Then she slipped into her canvas shoes and stepped out onto the porch. The sunlight was golden and alive, the kind that made the city look timeless. She knelt by the myrtle pot, pressing her fingers gently into the cool soil. A soft breeze brushed against her hair. For the first time in months, she felt entirely grounded, not waiting, not fearing, just being. The leaves of the young plant fluttered slightly, catching the light like tiny emeralds. Somewhere inside her, she felt her grandmother's voice again, not as a dream this time, but as a quiet certainty, a presence that no longer warned, only watched, proud and at peace. Amelia rose, dusted her hands, and turned back toward the house. The sunlight followed her in through the door, touching the walls, the photos, the open pages of her sketchbook. It seemed to say what no one needed to. You did it right. As she set her mug on the table, she glanced once more at Nora's photo. The smile in the frame seemed almost different now, less nostalgic, more approving. Outside, the day stretched open with quiet promise. There were lessons to teach, art to finish, and a life to live, all built on her own choices, her own name, her own steady hands. The world hadn't changed overnight, but she had, and that was enough.